Welcome to Reasonable Religion. What happens when the church becomes too relevant? I'm going to use a clip today from Dr. Jordan Peterson and Bishop Robert Barron to help to try to answer this question. I'll then give my own comments at the end with a small note on how Jordan Peterson understands the Orthodox Church, which he mentions in this video. And you should also note that when they refer to the church in this video, they're referring to the Catholic Church. Otherwise, Jordan Peterson would say the Orthodox Church. Here's the clip, and I'll come back for my comments.
The church does not demand enough of young people.
Yeah, I think that's
doesn't
right.
demand enough, and by not demanding enough, it doesn't indicate its faith in their possibility. And
yeah,
so now in Orthodox Christianity, as I understand it, there seems to me to be more emphasis on the idea that it's each human's obligation to become like Christ. That's the goal. Well, that's that by definition, we could say, and we could speak psychologically about this as well. That means to become the ideal that's beyond rationality. Even that's what you're aiming at. That's what's hypothetically within your grasp. What would happen? And this is the right question for your life. What would happen if you took that seriously? And so again, what I see is that it doesn't seem to me to be, if the church can no longer attract young people, it has to be that they're not taking that with sufficient seriousness. Now,
yeah, I think there's a lot to that.
I don't want to externalize the blame. It's like, I know the church is a human organization and all of that, but it's still evidence.
When I was coming of age, so back in, like, say, the 1970s, the presumption of the church was we should make this thing as easy as possible, because if we make it hard, these people are going to run away. So we don't want to make it intellectually easy. So I got a very dumbed down Catholicism. It was through the grace of God that I discovered later in life the very rich Catholic intellectual tradition. But when I was going through school, including through high school, banners and balloons and collages, and it was a very superficial. We got the clearer impression when I was a kid that English and science and math and all that were serious subjects. Religion was like gym, or it was like, I don't know what else, like art class or something. It was considered not that serious. So we dumbed it down intellectually, and we lessened the moral demand, for sure, because we didn't want, I think, people to run away. And then, I'll say it bluntly, rather pathetically, we tried to be as relevant as possible. That was the term from our time.
Right, and that's like the uncool guy at the party, man.
Right.
If you have to strive to be relevant, you're not on the cutting edge, that's for sure.
Right. And so there's a study I read some years ago that I thought was very plausible. The conclusion was what young people find compelling in a mentor figure are the two things. One is that the person knows a lot about the subject that he or she is sharing. And secondly, they're really committed to it. And when the kids sense those two things, well, there's a lot to know here, and this guy or this woman, they really believe it. They find that compelling. You don't need, the games of relevance. You don't need to dumb it down. In fact, smarten it up and make it as intellectually challenging and morally challenging as possible. We dropped a lot of practices that were much more common years ago, to kind of draw young people into the challenge of it. So that is a problem, absolutely.
It's a great video, as you can see, and I respect these men very much. I just want to make a couple of comments and observations. So regarding the answer to the question of whether or not the church ought to be relevant, it depends on what you mean by relevant. If you mean the church must always be commenting only on what society deems valuable, or it has to be culturally savvy and always up to date and always that type of relevant, then I would say no. And I think that's what Bishop Barron is referring to in this video. But when you say relevant, if you're talking about spiritual healing, if you're talking about the internal disposition of the self, and it's requiring to be oriented to someone and something higher, then yes, the church ought to be relevant. When the church focuses on being what it is and its mission in being the bride of Christ, then what happens is those who follow the church's practices end up being restored, being healed. They flourish and they help those around them, individuals and communities and societies, to flourish as well. So in that sense, the church is the most relevant. How many people are aching today? How many people have these spiritual sicknesses emptiness. And that's how the church can primarily understand its relevance in the world today. I don't mean to say it should entirely ignore everything that's around it. The church should always be a citizen in the world in order to help the world. But its primary mission and focus must not be lost. The church brings Christ to the world. And if it does anything short of that, it is not fulfilling its mission. Insofar as being relevant aids that mission in spreading Christ and spreading love and spreading humility and embodying Christ and showing Christ to the world, showing what love really is in self-sacrifice, insofar as the things around us in the world aid that mission, then they may be permitted to a certain extent. But the mission is always singular, and that is how the church has survived and will continue to survive and thrive in different parts of the world. One note I do want to make about Jordan Peterson's comment on Orthodox Christians maintaining a high bar. I agree. So that is a good thing, Orthodox Christians maintaining a high bar. When Jordan Peterson says the aim is the ideal, I think he probably understands that in some moralistic or psychological terms, that there is this moral bar to be reached. I would disagree that that's how Christianity works and that's how Orthodoxy works. It is not a moral bar like do not kill, do not steal, but the idea in Orthodox Christianity is to shoot for unity with that ideal, which in turn brings about assimilation to the ideal. But if you shoot for the ideal itself, apart from the person in whom resides that ideal, you will not reach the ideal. Striving for the ideal, qua ideal, as an ideal, won't work in and of itself. Just like in my previous video, when I mentioned that if you read the Bible as a self-help book, it won't self-help. But if you read the Bible for the purposes of unity with God, it will self-help, because that increasing proximity of the spirit to its spiritual creator does fix a person. That's the point. It transforms a person into a Christ-like being, into a self-sacrificial person, into a full human being the way we were intended to be. It's a bit paradoxical, but if you shoot to be like Christ, but you reject Christ, right? It's just an ideal. If you just shoot to be like Christ without wanting Christ, then you won't be like Christ. The only way to reach the ideal is to unite to the ideal. And the only way to unite to the ideal in Orthodox Christianity is to strive synergistically with God's grace. So it is a practice of constantly reorienting oneself to God, striving in that direction, and opening oneself up through repentance for God's grace. God's grace initiates, sustains, and completes. So God's grace is pervasive all throughout Orthodox Christianity. And yet there needs to be this understanding that the pursuit is of God, and the byproduct is perhaps this moralistic or psychological ideal that may be reached, because the belief is that Christ is the fulfillment of human nature. In order to be a full, perfect, complete human being, the more you become like Christ by assimilation to him, similitude to him, uniting to him, the more you are complete as a human being. And I think Bishop Barron is right to note at the end that Christians shouldn't forsake difficult spiritual practices. It is on those spiritual practices given by the church in its wisdom through divine inspiration that people are transformed into this ideal, again, through God's grace and through human volition and participation. That's my 2 cents for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, comment. I appreciate all those people who have been suggesting future videos. I will get to those. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you at the next video.